Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. Hope that you're doing well, and I hope that everything in your world is going as well as possible. I know that is not the case in many situations, but if I had it my way, everybody would be having a good day. It's been a weird day here for me. A lot of stuff going on that I'm going to end up having to be vague about, which is not necessarily my favorite thing to do, but just lots of stuff going on. So let's say hello to everybody. Matt, welcome. KP, it's good to see you. Schmonite is getting a helmet. I hope that there are no contact needed events that happen during the course of the stream, but you know, things do happen. Diviner, welcome in. Fall Machine, what's up? Yeah, we've had I don't know, man. Aloha, Frank, good to see you. Cave Geek is here. It's just the whole gang. The puppy has come to visit. I'm gonna go see the puppy. Licking my elbow. Hello, puppy. What are you doing? If you'll notice, the puppy is not wearing her collar, so she's a bit of we call her a naked puppy when she's not wearing her collar. She got a bath today. What's up, Cliff? Good to see you. You're gonna give me the paw? No, just look at me. We don't actually say Nakey. We do sometimes call her a harlot when she's running around the house naked in front of everybody, exposing her nakedness. But it's all in good jest. She doesn't understand those words. What are you doing, Kaylee? Oh, well, I think she's about to start, like, licking and... Anyway, yeah, we're gonna not watch all of that. We don't need to see that on stream. That's probably some TOS junk. A hedonist. Yeah, that's a good one. Hey. What are you doing? Anyway, so we've got a pretty good crowd here. And I might say this again at the end of stream, but I've mentioned this before on stream, but the sort of like arrival date has arrived as of today. So it's not my favorite thing to do to talk about monetary support for the stream, but I do feel as if it is important for everybody to know what they're getting into. As of today, all subscriptions to the channel have been, all tier 1 subscriptions to the channel have been raised by $1. And this is not something that I did. This is something that Amazon did. So it will now cost you $6 a month, US dollars, to subscribe to the channel. I have been told by Twitch and assured by their Amazon overlords that this is actually going to be better for me. But if we're being very clear, this is really just better for Amazon and Twitch. If you want to continue to subscribe to the stream, you are welcome to do so. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of what's going on, and I don't want you to be surprised and then feel weird about something. I will also remind everybody that if you want to offer monthly monetary support, I do have a Patreon. There is currently only one tier, and it's literally called the alternate subscription, and it is $5 a month. I'm not going to move that price, even if Amazon decides to move theirs. And in the sense of full disclosure, I'm not telling you that you should go there, or I'm not telling you that you should change your mind, but I do get more of a cut from Patreon than I do from Amazon. Even with their new arrangement where I'm going to get roughly $3-ish from a subscription, I still get more of the $5 from Patreon. Now, if you don't feel like doing any kind of monetary support, don't. I'm not asking for it, I'm not expecting it, and I don't stream because of it. If I made $0 streaming, I would still stream, I promise you. That has been the decision from the very earliest days of this stream, that I am doing this because I want the world to be better and that I enjoy it, and this is not a job to me. I'm not reliant on this money. I don't need it to survive, so don't feel weird or don't feel bad. If you do want to do monetary support for the stream, please just pick one. I know that there are some people that are on both, and I'm not telling you that that was a bad thing. Again, I'm not doing this for the money. Rockets and elections are expensive. This is true. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so to cap all of that stuff up, if you want to monetary support the stream, I understand that Twitch is getting more expensive. If you need to drop off of Twitch, drop off of Twitch. If you want to continue doing something, Patreon exists. If you don't want to do either, that's cool too. Showing up, hanging out, asking good questions, having good communication, that's worth way more to me than a couple bucks, just to be for real. So I'm not telling you that you shouldn't. I'm just also trying to make sure that everybody knows that you don't have to. I don't expect it, right? I appreciate all of it, and I've been trying to be very open about my appreciation of monetary support. I've built things to say thank you for stuff. Anyway, you get it. I'm getting kind of weird about it. But anyway, that's what's up with the Twitch stuff. So tonight, I know normally on Thursdays we would be doing a sort of mainline history stream, but Tuesday, which was usually reserved for viewer request, I streamed for 10 hours, which was a very odd experience. So I obviously did not do a viewer request that night on top of 10 hours during the day. And I owed my wife a birthday stream. As part of her birthday every year, she gets to pick a stream, and she gets to have a stream about whatever she wanted to. So she picked the Freedom Summer, and as a way to keep that sort of sooner rather than later, this is why we're doing it on a Thursday. But I do think that this is an appropriate stream for a lot of reasons. First off, I don't think a lot of people know about this stuff just in general. Number two, it is a sort of momentous, I don't know, we make a lot out of dates. But this is the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Summer. It happened in 1964. Some of the events that we're going to be talking about tonight happened like almost to the day 60 years ago. And I also think that this is going to be potentially beneficial for a lot of people that are potentially considering just sitting out voting for the rest of their life. And I hope that seeing what some of these people went through will make you reconsider. So, that being said, where do we really start? Do we just start in 1964 and say, boom, here we go? No, that's not what we're going to do. If you all have been around, you know that I'm going to sort of work you up to it and explain what's going on. So there's a little bit of historical background, and this is also going to fill in some of the blanks for people that might not be up on United States history, because I know that we do have a lot of people that aren't United States citizens, that aren't sort of filled in on all of the nitty-gritty kind of things. All right. During the Civil War, the United States is going to pass the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution. These are all very important. The 13th is going to say that slavery is outlawed, except in prisons. The 14th says that every person that's born within the boundaries of the United States is a citizen of the United States. And then the 15th Amendment basically tries to reinforce the idea that everybody that is a citizen has all of the rights of a citizen. Now, obviously, there are loopholes in all of these. Most notably, in the 15th Amendment, if everybody's a citizen, why doesn't everybody get the right to vote? Because at this point in the 1800s, women of any race could not vote. Yeah, so how do we handle that? There are obviously loopholes here that need to get described and filled in as we go, and we will. So then we have a monumental Supreme Court decision. This is the Supreme Court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson essentially states that there is a legal allowance for separate facilities and separate services to be rendered to races as long as the services are of equal quality or merit. So in United States history, we refer to this as separate but equal. So this legal framework of separate but equal is what sets up the idea of legal segregation, right? Shouldn't that be, I'll go over some U.S. history because I'm aware that not everyone is. Yeah, that was directly stated. And we don't need the snide remarks about how Americans are stupid. I think I've been very clear about how most Americans are undereducated. So rubbing it in is a bit of a bad move around here. Do U.S. laws get based on court cases? Sometimes yes, Diviner. The way that the Supreme Court works is that it has what's called like final jurisdiction, and its job is to ultimately decide what is and what isn't constitutional. So if the Supreme Court of the United States says something is constitutional or is not constitutional, then the legislative branch, whose job it is to make the laws, have to abide by those decisions. The only way to change that would be to literally alter the wording of the Constitution, and this is where constitutional amendments come in. So if, for example, the Congress wants to overrule or override a Supreme Court decision, one of the things that it could do would be to try to pass a constitutional amendment that would reinforce the idea of their particular interpretation over the Supreme Court's interpretation. And this has happened several times throughout United States history with things like prohibition, where the court cases continued to allow for alcohol, but there was a big movement towards banning alcohol. And what ended up happening was the people of the United States pushed Congress to write a set of basically the 18th Amendment. And when the 18th Amendment got passed, this overruled all of the state decisions that allowed for alcohol to be continued to be sold in bars and things like that. And it said, that according to the Constitution of the United States now, nobody can buy or sell alcohol. And at that point, the Supreme Court has to, theoretically, obey the wording of the Constitution. So even if everybody on the court thought you should be able to sell alcohol, the Constitution now says that you can't. So they can't rule against that if it's a blatant situation. Starts humming It's a Man's World. What up, Chris TS? So Double Tribble, who gave the Supreme Court the power to decide what law is? The Constitution did. The Constitution describes the powers of the Supreme Court, and it gives them the ability to interpret constitutionality. It says that they have the ability to set up jurisdiction over things and make decisions that are going to properly interpret the way that laws should interact with the ultimate governing principles of the Constitution. So that was written into the Constitution itself. Yes, fair enough. It's a little bit different here in the Netherlands, but it happens every once in a while. Yeah. And to be fair and to be clear here, Diviner, we haven't passed an amendment to the Constitution in a long time. It's been since the 90s, and we desperately need more of them right now. In my opinion, and I guess I should maybe put on the opinion hat, but we need things like term limits for congressional members, bans on lobbying, bans on illegal or outside our unlimited donations of money to politicians. We need a lot of amendments. A lot of amendments. Jefferson said that the Constitution doesn't give the Supreme Court power to do this. They gave it to themselves in Marbury versus Madison. That's a fair point, Natty. But the specific terms of Marbury versus Madison are going to not exactly be the way that that was cast. The Jefferson was very clear on not wanting the judicial branch to be run away. He and a lot of the people, ironically here, including Adams, who he didn't always agree with, but Adams was actually on board with this, mostly because Adams' brother being thrown in jail in Halifax for so long. They were aware that the legislative branch and the judicial branch were going to inevitably come to loggerheads with each other, but this is actually why they very clearly stated that there were going to be 3 co-equal branches, and they did give a lot of powers specifically to the Supreme Court. Now, the one that you're talking about specifically in Marbury versus Madison, giving themselves universal jurisdiction over all laws that were passed, regardless of whether they were on state or federal levels. That is something that Jefferson would have been very uncomfortable with, and I think would have probably even been a little bit upset at the way that that turned out. But there's a difference between the specific things that he would have been arguing there and the actual powers that are delineated and enumerated to the Supreme Court by the Constitution. And there are quite a few of those. And you can, obviously here refer to the Constitution. Just put the hat on. So here we go. Here's the opinion hat. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, what are opinions? What amendments do I think that we need to the Constitution? Here's my opinion. We need term limits on congressional representatives. We need congressional representatives to be banned from receiving all types of gifts, period, full stop. We need congressional representatives to be forced to disclose every person that they speak with under personal business, and we need to very clearly delineate the difference between personal business and official business, which I think is something that we also need to delineate for the executive branch, obviously. We need to clarify the procedures for holding presidents accountable for actions committed while they're under office. We need to clarify impeachment. We need to reinforce the idea of actual equality across the board with something like a women's rights amendment, which everybody goes, well, we already had the 14th Amendment. Yeah, we had the 14th Amendment, and we're about to talk about stuff in just a little bit about how a whole bunch of people were directly denied the ability to vote, despite the fact that the 14th Amendment already existed. So be quiet with that garbage. We need something that completely eliminates money from politics, that says that you cannot accept campaign donations, and we need an amendment that basically eliminates political action committees and super PACs. And people have to run basically on their own merits with a stipend that's given to them by the government, and that's all that they can spend. There are a lot of things that we need to do to fix our government. A lot of things. So, yeah. I could keep going. Halifax, Nova Scotia. Yes. So, Claire, at the time that we were revolting and pre-revolt from the British, one of the things that the British did to discourage people doing things like smuggling or standing up to the British throne was to put them in these specific types of prisons to be basically sit and rot waiting for a for a court date. Samuel Adams ended up in one of these jails in Halifax, and they would send you a long way away from where you were from, in an attempt to make it very, very difficult for you to get assistance. So Sam Adams was from Boston, and when he was brought up on false charges and strung up for a bunch of garbage, they sent him all the way to Halifax to keep him away from the other people in Boston that were very readily available to him if they had kept him in Boston. So they were trying to keep him away from his support base effectively. And they did this sometimes too by sending people to the Caribbean or sending them to different parts of Canada. It was just an attempt at separation means weakness, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much would it annoy constitutional scholars if I referred to him as OG Tommy J? About a 7. And it would be higher if they knew what OG meant. I would bet that a lot of constitutional scholars probably wouldn't know what OG was. I do know a constitutional scholar that would love that, but he also listens to Wu-Tang Clan. And during COVID, very frequently wore his Wu-Tang is for the children face mask to court. What's up, Snowlock? Are these amendments because they change how the government works or because the Senate would never vote for these things? Both. Both, Tad. Both. So we need to convince the corrupt to renounce the corrupting influence of huge amounts of money. Yes, but we don't need to ask them to renounce it. We need to tell them that they can't do it anymore. And we have the ability and the authority to do that. We just don't. Branches of power are at odds sometimes. Here the police recommends people to defend themselves. The courts punishes people for doing so. Yeah. And see, that's always the kind of thing. When you have multiple branches of government where the borders are going to kind of rub up against each other, you're going to get friction between those two things, right? Did you come into the middle of an opinion hat? You did, Snowlock, you did. I thought he specifically wrote that the Constitution doesn't give them the right to determine what is constitutional at all, and it went on about how it essentially assaults oligarchs. Well, see, the thing is, that's his interpretation of what it does. I don't necessarily agree with Jefferson on his interpretation. So you got to remember that Jefferson, in general, is always going to be paranoid about the United States turning into England. So if anything was even like 10% looking maybe England-esque, it was slippery slope all the way to nobility, right? Jefferson, his opinion was ultimately that people that aren't going to know things as well as we do are going to be in charge of this, and we don't need to give them any power so that they can't abuse anything. And if we give them any power at all they're going to end up doing is abusing it. Now, I agree with his ultimate end thing, most notably the fact that people in government today don't really understand how the government works. But I don't necessarily agree with his initial assessment of what was inevitably going to happen. And I don't think that it is, right? I don't think that the Supreme Court today is ultimately a group of oligarchs. I think that we could have just as easily addressed his concerns by having term limits for the Supreme Court, right? How do we have the ability to do that? In the United States, the people of the United States can amend the Constitution without congressional approval. According to the Constitution itself, if the people of the United States believe that there needs to be a constitutional amendment, what they need to do is go to their state representatives and have their state representatives call for a constitutional convention. And when 2/3 of the states call for a constitutional convention together, then the constitutional convention itself can write any number of amendments and then send them to the states unilaterally for state approval. Constitutional amendments do not have to come from just Congress. We can literally and utterly bypass every single elected official in Congress if we so desire to, and we are motivated to do so. We just don't. Funny how both him and Alexander Keith were politicians around that same time, and both are more famous for their namesakes. Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, true. Jefferson was very anti-central power, 100%. 100%. Jefferson had Confederation probably tattooed across his back. But ultimately, I think that he caved to a lot of stuff because he had seen the crippling power of the Articles of Confederation. Right? He saw that nothing was getting done. So there are zero gatekeepers. It's a literal direct democracy. Yeah, so once the states call for a constitutional convention, then the states themselves are going to vote for representatives, and they can pick whoever they want to. There are no qualifications for that. They don't have to pick the people that are in Congress. So if we hated literally everybody in Congress, we could just not pick any of them. We send them to the Constitutional Convention. Those people write the amendment. They send it back out to the states. And when 2/3 of the states agree, it gets added to the Constitution. So if we wanted to limit congressional terms, we could do that without congressional approval. Yep. Or limit congressional pay. I love Confederation as a tool for the EU. A federation as the U.S. had would never work here. There are a lot of differences between countries in the EU that make the particular model that was chosen much more lasting and durable than a truly federal model like we would have here in the States. Absolutely true. But let's try to get back on track here. So we have amendments to the Constitution. Those are going to issue in a very brief period of time in the 1860s and early 1870s, where a lot of people that are black do vote. But then we have Plessy versus Ferguson, which sets up segregation and ushers in a group of laws that we all refer to historically as Jim Crow laws, which is segregation under the legal aspect or legal umbrella concept of separate but equal. We all know that it was very separate, and we all know that it was not equal. Separate but equal was a lie, and it was allowed to continue because ultimately America was racist as heck. And let me be very clear here. While racism was absolutely concentrated in the South and in certain parts of the Midwest, racism was everywhere, as noted by the fact that Congress didn't pass substantial reform to a lot of this stuff until the 50s of the 1900s. So you get segregation going for probably, at this point, almost 70 years before anybody decides that they should probably try to do something to fix it, right? Fun off-topic fact, anyone in Boston at Christmas time who sees the city's tree, that's a gift from us in Nova Scotia. We send one every year to Boston as a thank you for the aid that they provided during the Halifax explosion in 1917. Oh, cool. I did not know that, but that's pretty cool. Halifax explosion. I'm guessing something blew up. Sucks that the Union did a poor job at Reconstruction. Yeah, it really did. We actually did a stream on Reconstruction specifically and how horrible it was, Natty. As a viewer request I guess that was back last summer maybe. So, then we have a little bit of change, and a little bit of change starts in the early 50s. A little bit of change starts in the early 50s, and this is actually, I guess it sort of starts at the end of World War II, specifically with soldiers that are coming back from World War II, especially soldiers that were black coming back from World War II, coming back after seeing a European model where people weren't segregated and people got along really well and were really interested in making that work in the United States. So the earliest movements of the civil rights leadership stuff started probably in the late 40s. There was a big kerfuffle in 1948. I can unfortunately show you a picture of some horrible racist jokers like this guy. This guy's name is Strom Thurmond. In 1948, he actually ran for president under a new political party called the Dixiecrats. And his entire platform was basically the federal government should not try to end segregation. This guy's a a horrible person and unfortunately served in Congress for almost 60 years. So you had people like this running for political office, and he won a lot of the states in the South. This is the last time a third-party candidate has won a substantial number of states in a presidential election, so almost 100 years ago. But he was running on this idea that the federal government should not interfere with states' rights. It always comes back to this states' rights things, right? Now, he was already showing fractures in the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party was kind of considering getting behind civil rights. Now, that's not across the board thing, and there are going to be plenty of Democratic people, especially in the South, that are still super duper crazy racist. Now, what does this end up doing? It ends up creating a lot of disparity. A lot of disparity. Specifically with voters and with voting disparity. And I did a little bit of digging, and I found let me get this open. That's not right. Here it is. Okay. All right, so we get this to where I can share it. And this is going to be really, really sketchy looking stuff because it's a scan of some really crappy hand typed things. So this is the statistics of black and white voter registration in the 5 congressional districts of Mississippi. And this was produced in 1964. All right, so one of the things that we can look at here, and this is by county in Mississippi. So here are all the counties in Mississippi. The top line here is going to be the percentage of white voters that are registered to vote, and then the second line here is going to be the percentage of black voters that are registered to vote. And what you can see here are startlingly different numbers. 46.5 to 0.03, 50.5 to 1.1, 82.5 to 0.21, 73 to 7.6, 75 to 0.18. And you can just see how broad the disparity is here between there are 5 districts. So at this point, this was congressional districts. So Mississippi at that point sent 5 representatives to the House of Representatives. So these are broken down by congressional district. 69% to 0.02, 71.6 to 6, 85 to 0.07, 71 to 0.72. You can see here that it's dramatic. It's absolutely friggin' crazy upside down backwards, right? 83 to 0.03. So this is around the region where I live. 75 to 3.5, 57 to 0.3, 67 to 1.7, 99 to 2.3, 91 to 0.03. There was massive disparity. What do these numbers entail? This is the percentage of people that are registered to vote. So if you were of age, which means you were at that point in America over the age of 21, you could register to vote. So they knew how many people lived there based on the census, and then they looked at voter registration records and lined them up. So we're talking about like 80% of white people in this county being able to vote because they're registered versus 0.2% of black people that live in that county that are registered to vote. And the numbers are just absolutely minuscule. But this was a direct result of separate but equal, right? This was a direct result of Jim Crow laws that were designed at keeping black people away from being able to vote. And this was especially true because of the way that the laws of the United States have been interpreted to allow for people to deny voter registration. And there were about 4 or 5 big different ways that they ended up using to keep people from being able to vote. One of them was literacy exams. It was very frequent, especially in places in the South. If a black person went to go register to vote, they would make them basically read the state constitution and then answer questions about the interpretation of the law. And they would ask questions that lawyers would have trouble with. And then they would say, oh, well, you're not literate, so you don't get the right to vote. They would also do things like make them pay poll taxes. And these are literally fees that were able to be required at that point to be able to vote. And to register to vote, many places required you to have multiple years worth of poll tax receipts prior to registration. So you basically had to vote, or you had to pay 2 years in advance before you could register to vote. And the poll taxes weren't necessarily very high, but if you look at economic disparities among racial people in the South, this was overwhelmingly going to fall on people of color. And the poverty situation was actually lessened by things called grandfather clauses. So if you've ever heard the phrase, oh, I got grandfathered in, like if your phone company changes your rates or something, and they say, oh, well, we're going to grandfather you in. This is actually where the phrase grandfathered in comes from. So if you were in the South and your grandfather was eligible to vote, you didn't have to pay poll taxes. Or if your grandfather was eligible to vote, you didn't have to take a literacy exam. So this is where grandfathered in came from. And this was a way to make sure that poor white people that couldn't afford the poll taxes would still be able to register to vote, because they could go, oh, well, my grandfather had the right to vote. But a slave family whose grandfather was a slave in the 1860s, and I'm trying to register to vote in the 1920s, my grandfather couldn't vote, so I have to do this stuff, right? This was directly targeting people that were black. It's literally just a racist part of the structure, right? Uncle Sam, can we have enfranchisement? We have enfranchisement at home. The enfranchisement at home is 0.02%. Exactly. It's horrible. Snowlock asks, how did the image of Democrat and Republican swap? It's actually something that happens during this time period. Effectively, here's what happens. And this is actually something that would be worthy of an entire stream by itself. But the too long didn't read is the Democratic Party started pushing for civil rights, and the supporters of the Civil Rights Act in 57 and the support of the Civil Rights Act in 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 drove a big wedge between Southern people that were super racist and Northern people that were Democratic. And people like Strom Thurmond ended up changing his voter registry to Republican, because Republicans at that point were still considered conservative with a small c, and they had a lot of people that were actually championing for smaller central government. And the way that the racists sort of co-opted the Republican Party at that time was by saying, oh, smaller central government means more states' rights, and that means states should be able to decide about things like race laws and segregation laws. And the racist chunk of the Democratic Party basically took their ball and went and registered Republican. It's much more complicated than that and has a lot of like ins and outs, but effectively that's what happened. I did not steal CIA documents. Those are readily available on the internet. I just had to go dig them up. The subs y'all don't understand how people have darker skin tone struggle. Yeah, exactly. It's that Diviner. That's the point that I'm trying to get at. This is something that I don't think a lot of people. The Southern strategy is absolutely part of that, Natty, and that would be like a whole other thing that would be brought into that discussion. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that political realignment, including the people that deny it ever happened, people that say, well, we're the party of Abraham Lincoln, the Republicans, so we've always been anti-slavery. And then I have to remind them that Lincoln didn't actually want to end slavery. He just wanted to end slavery in the new states that were being added to the nation. And he thought that slavery would eventually probably just die out by itself, but he really wasn't necessarily super anti-slavery. He was a Free Soil Party member prior to being a Republican, but they don't understand any of that, mostly because they don't know any of that. Turns out that there's a big overlap between people that are uneducated and people that are racist. And if you're hearing me say that racism is stupid and people that are racist are also stupid, you're hearing me right. Anyway, so we have massive voter disparity. And I want to show you a guy specifically here from Mississippi because this guy's going to be a guy that shows up in the national news here in just a second. The white guy here is a dude named Theron Lind. And he was a circuit clerk and a voting registration agent not too far from where I live in the southern part of Mississippi here. So why am I showing you this guy? Well, I'm showing you this guy because he was one of these people that was sort of notorious for not letting black people register to vote. And the point here is that the system itself was being used to bar people from voting. But the system was being filled with people that wanted to perpetuate that system that kept people from voting. So what we have here is individual discrimination, but we also have institutional discrimination. And here's how it works. People like this guy who is just an absolute jerk face, and I'm kind of tired of looking at him, decided that their whole platform when they ran for office was going to be, we're not going to let black people register to vote. And this guy, Lind, was notorious for not letting black people register to vote. He kept getting elected over the span of about 25 years because he would not let black people register to vote in his district. He got investigated by the federal government and found guilty by the federal government for violating voting registration acts and still got reelected. And the people of his district helped him pay off his fees because they liked the fact that he was letting people or keeping people that were black from being able to register to vote. But specifically, I want to explain to you how dumb this whole situation was, because one of the things that was available in Mississippi was a competency test. The clerks that were going to do the actual voter registration could issue competency tests to people that were applying for registration to vote. And one of his most famous questions that he liked to ask for his competency exam was, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? And you go, well, how do we even know he asked that? Did he really ask that? We know he asked that because he's on federal court records admitting that he asked that. And people that were suing him on behalf of the federal government had witnesses that he had asked that question too. And in the judgment against him by the federal government, he was banned from asking that question. So he went on to asking things like, how many burps are in a can of Coke? And other garbage kind of stuff like that. This is obvious, horrible racial discrimination. And it was keeping this going because if you can't vote, you can't vote him out. And that's the point. Double Triple says Lincoln supported the Corwin Amendment. He did support the Corwin Amendment. This is something that basically said that Congress should not mess around with slavery. And theoretically, the people that were supporting the Corwin Amendment may have even tried to be pushing for it to be a constitutional amendment. Yeah. Kind of want a whole episode discussing the details of that swap. Yeah, Snorlax, we could, and that would be a great viewer request episode. You're on the list for viewer request episodes, by the way. So if you've got 10,000 points, you can request that. DCI Banks, welcome in. Says, I'm eating some American foods to accompany this episode. Jerky. I don't really care for the stupid flavor packet that comes with it, though. Exactly. He looks like a typical movie racist. Yeah. Yeah. 'Tis one thing to vote, 'tis the whole next thing to be running for office. Right. I wonder how chances were at that. I'm not sure exactly what you mean there, Diviner. Is he an anti-soper? What's up, Kyle? No, he was just a blatant and open racist. But this is the structure that existed in the South, right? This is why work needed to be done. So, what was the work that they started trying to do? Well, this starts with a lot of people in a lot of places. And, you know, I don't think we can get through this discussion without talking about the work of Martin Luther King Jr., who, of course, is one of the more famous civil rights advocates in the United States. He specifically was going to be involved in the formation of a group that is going to be very influential in the Freedom Summer. And this is called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And this is referred to as SCLC. The SCLC was a group, and this is formed in 1957, by the way. It's a creation, it's created to organize groups that were going to help push for civil rights in especially the South. And there were a couple of different things that Dr. King was really interested in doing. He wanted to educate people, and he wanted to get them involved in their local communities. And obviously this is what's going to start pushing for things like the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which came out, right around the same time. So the Civil Rights Act of 1957 did some things, but it didn't fix problems. First off, the purpose of the bill was to strengthen the language of voting registration and to basically force people to allow black people to register to vote. But there were a lot of people that were super big opponents to this, like our boy Strom Thurmond that I just mentioned. When the Voting Rights Act of 57 came to the floor, Strom Thurmond gave a 24-hour and 18-minute filibuster. It's the longest filibuster that's ever happened in the history of the United States. And a filibuster is when he stood up and started talking, and he literally did not yield the floor for 24 hours and 18 minutes. And this was specifically done to try to drag out the procedure of passing the bill to the point that people would give up on passing the bill. And no, this isn't 100 years ago. No, this is like within people's living memory, right? This is the United States within people's living memory. And this is one thing that blows my mind, because I don't think people connect with how recently this stuff was, right? The Freedom Summer in 64 was 60 years ago, right? There are still people that worked in the Freedom Summer that are still alive, right? Anyway, he had to pee his pants. I don't know. If you're calling Strom Thurmond to pee pants, I'm down with that. You can call him a lot of... you could have called him a lot of worse things, and I would have agreed with that too. Could African Americans run for office? Yes, they could, Diviner. They could run for office if they were allowed to get on the ballot. There was a lot of intimidation. If you were going to register to run for a particular candidate's position, you have to file proper paperwork to qualify to be a candidate, right? And in a lot of places in the South, if you even tried to turn in those papers, they would beat you, or they would kill you, or they would arrest you and throw you in jail on some garbage charge. So you could run for office, but a lot of people chose not to because it was literally a threat to their life. And I'm not joking here. I'm not being hyperbolic at all. I'm being very serious in this stream. There's no flowery language. If I say something, I mean it. The filibuster, another rule made up for slavery. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Rosa Parks could have watched Shrek in theaters. That's crazy. Holy crap, if this was only 60 years ago at your job, you work for a disabled elderly who... Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, you could go ask people today, hey, what was the Freedom Summer like in Mississippi? And they could tell you, right? And see, that's the thing, Diviner. That's the fallacy of separate but equal. Everybody knew it was separate, and everybody knew it was not equal. It was a farce, and it was a farce based on racism. Okay, so we have Dr. King working with the SCLC, and we have the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 57. So there is some movement going on here, and one of the groups that is going to add to this is going to be really, really important, and we'll put them here in our notes. This is the SNCC, but it says it's pronounced SNCC. And this group is going to be really, really important. This is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, there was another group, and there are so many abbreviations during this time period. I'm trying to only focus on the really, really big ones. There was this other big group called CORE, and it's the Congress of Racial Equality. This group had been around since the 40s, right after World War II started. But there was a notice, and this is something that they noticed both in the SCLC and in the Congress of Racial Equality. They noticed that a lot of young people were showing up to push for civil rights. And not CORN, it's CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. And they noticed that these young people were getting very, very involved. And they were pushing for stuff like civil rights. And there were also a lot of people that were from the North and from the West and from the Midwest that were younger, like college-age students that were getting involved in civil rights movements. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and I'm just going to call them SNCC from now on, because that's, I when I think of them, I say SNCC in my head, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew what I was going to say if you hear me say SNCC, right? So SNCC was founded right after the Greensboro restaurant sit-ins. And this is a very famous movement or event in February of 1960, where a bunch of college students went to a restaurant that was segregated in North Carolina, and they sat down and they asked to be served. And then when their service was denied, they didn't leave. And when they didn't leave, people started harassing them. They threw food at them. They dumped drinks over their heads. They got physical with them. Those people ended up getting dragged out of the building. But that made national headlines, that these young people, these college students, were willing to basically put it on the line to push for desegregation and equal rights. So SNCC is going to grow right out of that. And the lady that's going to be sort of instrumental in getting SNCC together is this lady. Her name is Ella Baker. And Ella Baker had been involved in quite a bit of work already. She was already very aware of the situation dealing with segregation. Obviously, she was a woman of color and had grown up with situations of being, discriminated against by herself. And she's going to be the original organizer of the first SNCC meeting. And she actually reached out to Martin Luther King to ask him to help fund the meeting, because having a place to put a whole bunch of people together and feed everybody and promote stuff cost money. And he actually gave her some money to get the first SNCC meeting put together. And when it hit, most of the people that showed up were younger people that were willing to super get involved. And almost immediately, this is going to start catching a lot of people's eyes. When you have a lot of people that are really fired up, that really wanted to do something, you want to sort of harness that and direct that. And the connection that puts Mississippi on SNCC's map is this gentleman. This gentleman's name is Amzie Moore. And Mr. Moore was a longtime civil rights advocate and had been deeply involved in trying to push for equal rights, especially in places like Mississippi, where he was from. Mr. Moore was especially big on voter registration, and he actually went up to the second SNCC meeting, which was in the fall of 1960 in the city of Atlanta, and he met Ella Baker, and he got to talking with her, and, you know, he told her his story. He was one of these World War II veterans that had gone to fight for the United States, that had experienced life and seen, you know, different parts of the world where segregation didn't exist, and then he came back home a veteran and went right back into segregation. And he just wasn't willing to stand by and let that continue, so he had joined the local NAACP, and by the early 1950s, he had become the president of the Mississippi chapter of the NAACP. And his big thing was, we've got to get people to vote. If we can get people to vote, we can start getting people to vote for candidates that are going to tear down segregation. But you can't get people in positions to move segregation if you don't get people to vote in the first place. And to get people to vote, you have to register people to vote. Young people tend to champion change the most. That's true in a lot of situations, Diviner. And it's absolutely true in this situation. SNCC was overwhelmingly young people, right? So, Amzie Moore going to go and talk with Ella Baker at the second SNCC conference, and he goes, look, we need to do some stuff in Mississippi. We need to get some of these people to come down to Mississippi, and we need to get them involved with, you know, highlighting racial disparity in Mississippi and getting people registered to vote in Mississippi. And one of the things that comes out of this is the famous Freedom Ride, the Freedom Riders. This is in 1961, which drove through Mississippi, Alabama, Mississippi, all the way through the South. This was in protest of segregated bus seating. And this is a very famous event that probably deserves an entire stream of its own. But basically, a group of young people that were black and white got on buses and drove on buses all the way through the Deep South. And they were the targets of violence. They were beaten. They were arrested. They were left in jail without charges. They were harassed. Their items and belongings were stolen. It was a whole big mess by itself. But in Mississippi, and this is something that Amzie Moore helped to set up himself with some other people in Mississippi, especially another guy named Bob Moses. And I'll show you Mr. Well, I guess I can go ahead and show you Bob Moses' picture now. So this is Bob Moses. Bob Moses is going to be, and you can see here that he was a younger guy. This picture came from 63. When the Freedom Riders came through in 61, a lot of them got arrested in Mississippi, just basically for not following some arbitrary rule about garbage, racism, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of those people got thrown in jail, and a lot of those people ended up needing legal help. And what ends up happening, especially in the Deep South, you have all of these groups like the SCLC and SNCC and CORE and all of these other groups, but there wasn't really any connective tissue between them, especially in the deepest part of the South. They didn't really have anybody whose job it was or whose task it was to make sure that all of the big groups were lined up and aimed in the same direction, or to try to get groups to pool resources or things like that. So the obvious thing here is to create basically an organizing group of organizations. So Bob Moses is instrumental in the early foundation of something called the Council of Federated Organizations. And basically what his job was to try to help coordinate getting people out of jail, getting people legal representation, and getting people money to pay fines. But what that does is it starts making connections between people outside of Mississippi with people on the ground in Mississippi. And if I'm in, say, Ohio, or if I'm in New York State, or if I'm in, Delaware, and I want to donate towards a cause, I go to my local church and say, hey, do you know anybody? And they call somebody directly in the South that they've worked with, or they call Bob Moses and they go, hey, we've got somebody up here that wants to donate some money to get somebody out of jail. And they give the money, and the money gets wired down there, and that person gets out of jail, and they call the person in Delaware back and they say, thank you for bailing me out of jail. And you've just made a connection between people, right? And that's what Bob Moses was really, really, really good at. He just wants to bring people together, and he wants to make these connections that were going to bring a lot of attention of individual people outside of Mississippi to Mississippi. Speaking of Black World War II vets, do you think that the Battle of Bamber Bridge would be enough to fill a viewer request stream? Maybe. I don't know. It's possible if I did like the entire, not the entire, but a lot of back work on where the specific units came from. Maybe. Some individual battles are doable, but a lot of, even when Matt wanted to do just the charge of the Light Brigade, like if we had just done the Battle of Balaclava, it really wouldn't have filled up a whole stream, right? Maybe. I don't know. I'd probably have to do something creative to try to fill up a lot of that time. Maybe if we included like the media coverage after that and how it ended up having like ripple effects, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, one of the people that is going to be sort of like the go-to person, right? So Bob Moses has got everybody moving around. We've got conversations between MZ and Ella Baker, and they're MZ Moore and Ella Baker, and they're talking. We've got money coming in. We've got attention coming in. And then they needed somebody that was like kind of on the front line. And that is going to be this lady. This lady is a lady named Fannie Lou Hamer. And she's going to be just unquestionably one of the most important members of this entire discussion. So Fannie Lou Hamer herself had gone through situations where she had been denied the right to vote. And she was literate. Like, she was really, like, above literate for the average person in Mississippi. Not just, oh, wow, it was great that she could read because she was black. But no, she had worked translating documents and writing documents for white people, right? She's just really friggin' smart. But she had been denied the right to vote under literacy exams multiple times. And if a super intelligent person that, like, you know, by any stretch of the imagination should have been able to pass one of these stupid literacy tests was being denied, that's going to tick her off. And it did. And she had also been physically assaulted by the police for continual attempts at registration, right? One of the things that they would do if they knew that you were going to go to register to vote is they would try to intimidate you. They would literally try to like harass you on your way to the clerk's office. People would follow you down the road. The police would stand in the doorway and prevent you entering. The clerk might say that you're trespassing and then have you thrown in jail. So she had been physically assaulted. She had been denied registration to vote multiple times. And she was in tight with all of these people. She knew people in the SCLC. She knew people in SNCC. She knew Bob Moses. She knew Amzie Moore from the NAACP, and she's going to work specifically with Bob Moses to do something that happened in 1963 called the Freedom Vote. Now, this doesn't get a lot of love in history, but it was really important. So in 1963, she and Bob Moses were going to organize a mock ballot. And this was designed to try to help people figure out how to register to vote and how to vote in the first place. So it wasn't a real vote, but it was really important. So people that wanted to participate in this event would go to a fake registration clerk, and they would fill out fake copies of the actual documents, right? They would go find the registration to vote documents, and these people would see the documents. And a lot of these things were designed to just be absolutely stupidly labyrinthine, right? Where like you have to do all these ridiculous, like have this copy of that thing and fill this line over here and put this thing over here. And the forms themselves were even designed to be incredibly complicated. So we're going to get you in with somebody that knows how to fill them out, like Fannie Lou Hamer, Bob Moses. They're going to walk you through the process of how to do this in a positive environment where you're going to be encouraged, you're going to be taught how to do this stuff. Then, once you filled out your mock registration form, you're going to go to a polling place. Now, this again, it's not an actual vote, but this was the way that they were trying to get people accustomed with the idea. You're going to go through a mock voting booth where you're going to have to go up and do the process. You're going to have to prove who you are. You're going to have to sign the piece of paper that says that you're registered to vote. You're going to have to show your voter registration. You're going to get your ballot. The ballots are designed to look like the actual ballots. Because again, let's remember, we take a lot of this stuff for granted because, we can read. A lot of these people that wanted to vote were semi-literate or couldn't read at all. So they needed to be helped to be shown how to vote, and they needed to be able to understand what parts were what and what went where without being able to actually read the page themselves, or they could be taught how to read the stuff on the page. So you would go do the voting thing, and then they collected all of these votes, and they did breakdowns of exit interviews and where you could go. And over this entire procedure, they were doing things like, here's how they've arrested people in the past. If you do this thing, it's going to give them cause to try to arrest you. So don't do that. If you do this thing, here's what they can do to you. Here's what they can't do to you. Here's what you are absolutely allowed to do. Here's what you're not allowed to do. And you need to stay, in the undeniable ability area. Did the FBI try to destroy this group too? No, actually, at this point in history, the FBI is coming down fairly hard on a lot of these racist people. Theron Lind, the big fat guy that I showed you that was asking people how many bars or how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, J. Edgar Hoover built a field office. Not J. Edgar Hoover. The FBI built a field office under the Attorney General's command in Mississippi to investigate this guy. In just a little bit, when we get to the actual Freedom Summer, the FBI is going to build another field office up in the northern part of the state to try to find out what happened to 3 of these people in the Freedom Summer. FBI is actually being kind of on the right side here. This could be a movie. It absolutely could be a movie. There are great people. There are big roles that could be played by great actors and actresses. The story is compelling. It's very interesting. I think this would be a great movie. To-do list Tuesday. Do the voting thing. Exactly. How the heck can you guys have fought in World War II and fought Nazis and then come back to this? DCI Banks, that's exactly what a lot of these people were asking. That is exactly what people... again, Amzie Moses was in World War II. He had seen this crap. And he's like, this is what evil looks like. And I'm coming back to people that are doing the same thing to black people that the Nazis were doing to Jewish people, right? Like, this is what fired up a lot of this stuff in the late 40s and the early 50s. Like, it's a world that's so, it seems so distant from the way that hopefully most people in America think today, that it seems like it was a million years ago, but it really wasn't. It really, really wasn't. It was just a couple of decades ago. If we're just being for real, it's like 2 generations ago. There was a movie called Mississippi Burning. So yeah, that's part of it, Maddie. Also good to see you, Maddie. Because people don't care about morality. Yeah, and see, that's part of it too. Like, when the institutions were enforcing racism, people that were growing up under institutions that supported racism thought that the institutions were correct. So if a person, and let me be very, very clear here, and listen to me carefully when I say this, right? If a person was a patriot that really supported the idea that the government was something that was sacrosanct, that the government was what we needed to protect, it's that idea is one step away from condoning racism if the government condones racism. So if I'm somebody that was being raised under a system of legal segregation, I might look at the government and go, holy crap, this is the government of Thomas Jefferson. This is the government of George Washington. This is the government of Abraham Lincoln. And you better not mess with the American government. And then, because the government says racism is okay, you think racism is okay. Now, I'm not excusing that at all. 0%. That is a horrible thing to do, because ultimately you're not making your own decisions. You're just allowing that to make a decision for you, and that's bullcrap, right? I'm not trying to say that racism is patriotic. I'm just saying that if a person really idealized the American system and that's the system that they saw, they would start thinking perhaps that system was good. And I don't like that idea, and I think it's a dumb thing, and I hate the fact that we had institutional racism in the history of our country, but it was there, and it's very, very obvious, and anybody that denies it isn't actually doing good research. It's not hard to find. Still is there. With you, Natty. Movie was in the 90s. Read up on Isaac Woodard. Yeah, he was beaten in his uniform after getting off of a bus, returning to his home, and ended up getting blinded. Also because America didn't fight World War II to fight fascism. Ooh, that's a hot take. Are you saying that World War II was fought to prop up the American economy? Perhaps, right? If you thought World War II had good guys, you'd be told a joke. War is one of those tricky things where we don't look at our sins because the sins of the other people are worse. I personally have a really hard time wrapping my mind around the concept of just war. This is not necessarily the platform to get into it because I'm not a philosopher. I do read a lot of philosophy and I hang out with philosophers, but that doesn't make me a philosopher. But just war theory is something that has been on people's minds for thousands of years. Let me just put it that way. Am I woke or something? Next thing, I'll be dyeing my hair blue. I've already had my hair blue when I was in high school. Most people didn't want to be in World War II. They just joined from being attacked. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's legit, too, right? You poke us, so we're going to poke you back. Sure. Okay, so Fannie Lou Hamer, Bob Moses, they do the freedom vote. Now, one of the things that came out of the freedom vote was publishing how many people had participated in the freedom vote. 80,000 people, almost 80,000 people, it's like 78 something thousand, showed up to participate in the freedom vote in Mississippi. At that time in Mississippi, there were only about 20,000 registered voters. So 80,000 people said, I want to vote, and I want to learn how to vote, and I want to learn how to register to vote. and only 20,000 people in Mississippi that were black were eligible to vote in the first place. Right? So we're talking about a fifth of the voting age population showed up to be able to actually vote in the election, where 4/5 had to go through a mock process because they weren't allowed to register to vote. This is crazy talk, right? But this is what made the Freedom Summer happen, because Bob Moses made it work. He went to work, he started talking to people, and he said, look at how many people want to register to vote. Look at how many people want to try to get involved in the system, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need help. We need people that are going to show up to help teach. We need people that are going to show up to help get people out of jail. We need people that are going to send money. We need volunteers. And Bob Moses goes up to people in the SCLC and goes and talks to people in SNCC. I mean, 20% is a lot better than 2%, sure. But if you look at where the... if I showed you population centers of Mississippi and we pulled that county list back up, the people that were eligible to vote were only in about 3 cities that had more, I guess, more equitable voter registration. So Brittany's birthday was back in June. So we've been past her birthday for several weeks now. Anyway, so Bob Moses goes to SNCC and says, we need a whole bunch of college students. And we need to see who's interested. And we also need a whole bunch of lawyers. And we need a whole bunch of religious people. So go find some people that are going to come to Mississippi. So what do they find? They find a whole bunch of college students that are going to be super interested in going down. They're going to get a lot of lawyers that are going to volunteer to process legal paperwork, to show up at court cases if need be, to show up at jailhouses and to show up at police offices to get people out of jail. And they're going to get a whole bunch of religious leaders that are going to show up and do things like go to protests. And they're going to do things like talk with elected officials. Because here's the thing. One of the things that is sort of sacrosanct in the Deep South is, of course, religion. So if you've got a pastor that's coming in to talk to you about letting these white people out of jail because all they were doing is trying to help black people register to vote, that's going to give like a leg up. And Bob Moses knows this stuff. Like he's getting the people together, right? This is like collecting the Freedom Avengers. So they send out the word for volunteers, and they get kind of blown out of the water. More than 1,000 people signed up to go to the South to help run this event, and it was going to be during the summer, and they're going to do a whole bunch of stuff down in the South. So when they sent out these notifications, they got 1,000 people or so back, and then they had to kind of like follow up, and they ended up sending all these volunteers personalized letters, and it said stuff like, "Hey, just to make sure you know, this is what you're signing up for. What you need to do is you need to do some research, and you need to look at personal accounts of people from the South." That one of the things that they told them to do was read Martin Luther King's document that he wrote while he was in the Montgomery jail after the Montgomery bus boycotts, where he had been thrown in jail for basically being black and had watched a lot of his people get very violently beaten by the police. So you need to read this. And also, if you show up to volunteer, it would be really, really helpful if you would bring your own bail money. Like, they're telling them ahead of time, you're probably going to get thrown in jail. You're probably going to need to bail yourself out. They were also warned against all sorts of violence. They were told about the massive levels of disparity, the level of activity with the KKK in Mississippi, the integration of the police force and the KKK in Mississippi. And yet, more than 1,000 people still showed up to volunteer for the Freedom Summer. So, what do? Let me catch up with chat. Something tells me that if information exchange was stronger back then, they would have rallied more people. Absolutely. That's true. But it's amazing that they did what they did with what they had. There were much more violent revolts back then. Yeah, that's true too. The U.S. is very big, sure. Some of those who work forces are the same that burn crosses. Really, Vipers? It's like we should rage against the machine or something. I'm with you. Anyway, so they're going to show up to training camps. And these are going to be in the early part of June in 1964. And these were up in Ohio. They were at a woman's college in Ohio. And they were taught what they needed to do. So there are a few big aims for the Freedom Summer. Number one, we want to teach civics. We want to actually teach people what their rights are. We want to teach them how to register to vote. We want to teach them what these positions do. We want to tell them, like, this person that's the chancery clerk does this. This person that's the circuit clerk does this. This person that's the small claims court judge does this, etc., etc., etc. So that they knew who to vote for and how to vote more accurately, so that they knew who to hold accountable for certain things, so that they knew who to appeal to for certain things. They knew who to hold accountable for certain things, right? So basic civics, that's sort of like the ground level, and they're going to have these things called freedom schools, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in just a bit. They're going to promote voter registration. And specifically here, targeting people that were of voting age, getting them to apply for the right to vote. And then finally, and I've actually got a great picture of this, one of the things that Mississippi was pushing for was for a separate Mississippi convention to get sent to the Democratic National Convention, and for this separate Democratic Party to be an integrated party, right? So the Democratic Party of Mississippi at that point was still overwhelmingly racist and overwhelmingly white, right? There were basically no black people in the Democratic Party. But what Hamer and Moses wanted to do was elect a different slate of people that were going to go to the convention to push for integrated tickets. And I actually have a photo here. Here's Fannie Lou Hamer and Bob Moses at the Democratic National Convention in 1964. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, I really liked that picture, so I wanted to show you that these people weren't just talking; they were doing the work, right? Anyway, so that's the three goals: teach civics, promote voting, get Mississippi to push for an integrated Democratic Party. Okay, this is where the tough stuff starts. In the early part of June, around June 15th, some of the earliest Freedom Summer people run into some trouble, and I'm going to show you their pictures and I'll tell you their names. So this is James Chaney. He was 21 in the summer of 1964. This is Mickey Schwerner, who was a newlywed and was 24 in the summer of 1964. And this is Andrew Goodman, who was 20 in the summer of 1964. And these three were in the first group of people that went down into Mississippi in the Freedom Summer. And they went to a county called Neshoba County. And they didn't even get really out of their vehicles before the sheriff of Neshoba County, a guy named Lawrence Rainey, had them arrested because they sort of the police knew what was about to happen. Like they knew what was happening. They had been informed that these people were about to start showing up. So the three guys were dragged out of their vehicle. They were beaten, and then they were thrown into jail. And then they sat in jail without really having any charges against them for quite some time. And then after it got dark, they were let out of jail and told that they needed to leave town. And so they got in their vehicle and started trying to leave town. And they got not too far down the road before they ran into a KKK ambush. And when they ran into the KKK ambush, Mr. Goodman and Mr. Schwerner were pulled out of the car and they were shot. And Mr. Cheney tried to get away, but they caught him and beat him to basically death and then shot him too. And then hid all evidence that they were ever in the city and dragged their bodies over to a local pond where there was a big dam, and they buried their bodies in the dam. And nobody really knew what happened to these guys. They weren't really in contact with a lot of people. They just sort of, were supposed to check in. When they didn't check in, people started asking questions. When people started asking questions, some word that they had shown up got out. And then when they found out that nobody knew where they were and nobody knew what was going on, the wheels started turning. And to the FBI's credit, the people that were involved in the planning of Freedom Summer went straight to the government, and J. Edgar Hoover sent down an entire squad of FBI agents and even co-opted some of the local National Guard and even some of the local Navy people to basically try to figure out what had happened to these guys. And it took them all the way until August, so basically 2 months of searching to figure out where their bodies had been basically buried. In the process of searching for these three guys, the FBI actually found the victims of about 7 other murders that were missing black people that had been listed as missing after doing civil rights advocacy kind of stuff. So then the government decided that they were going to press charges. And 10 men were charged with crimes, including the sheriff, a local pastor, several of the deputies, the local grand wizard of the KKK, and about 4 or 5 other KKK members. The sheriff and the pastor were acquitted of all charges. They served no jail time and faced no penalties. 1 other person was acquitted of charges. 7 were convicted of various charges, but none of murder. And only 6 of the 10 served jail time. And the longest sentence of the 6 was 6 years. 6 years for murder. Triple homicide, to be specific. The KKK is absolutely a terrorist organization, and it, even if it wasn't labeled as one then, it was then too. Now, I would love to say that all of these men eventually found justice, but they didn't. In 2005, there was, actually in 2004, which was the 40-year anniversary of the Freedom Summer, there was a documentary made, and a lot of people got very upset about how little justice had been dispensed. And they convinced the local authorities in Mississippi to reopen cases. And one other person went on trial in 2005 and was convicted of 3 counts of manslaughter and given 60 years of jail time. And at that point, the guy was 80 years old, so obviously did not serve 60 years. But what I found absolutely disgusting, absolutely and utterly disgusting, is when that guy got convicted, and I'm not even going to say his name because he's not worthy of me saying his name. When he got convicted and put in jail, he tried to get out several times for, I'm an old man, you should let me out of jail. And his final appeal to the Mississippi Supreme Court was based on an interpretation of jury of your peers, right? So in the law, the law is based around you being convicted by a jury of your peers. And his legal argument for why his conviction should be overturned was that if he had been tried in 1964, no jury of his peers would have found him guilty. And it's fair to note that the juries for all of these crimes were also all white. The one that convicted the guy for 6 years for triple homicide was all white. The jury was in Neshoba County, where it wasn't a 100% population that was white. It's just absolutely disgusting, right? It's just absolutely disgusting. I got so mad trying to put all this stuff together. But it's worth talking about because I don't think people get how close this was in proximity. A lot of people go, man, how is the South so racist? Because it's the same people that are still alive. They're not dead. They're just old. Right? Ugh, sorry, I'm getting a bit fired up here. People get 6 years for killing one person. Hydrocannabinoid, they might get 6 years for involuntary manslaughter. The way that these 3 men were killed was murder 1. Triple homicide with malice aforethought. This was planned. They were targeted. They had the people that perpetrated the murders had absolutely coordinated with each other. They had made elaborate schemes. They lied to cover it all up. Yeah, this was murder with malice aforethought, right? Most instances like this are never made it to trial. That's true, Maddie, and that's another thing to point out. 6 years was kind of remarkable at the time, and let's remember that the sheriff who was 100% in on this got no jail time, didn't get convicted of anything at all, and he knew that the KKK was waiting for these guys when he let the Freedom Summer people out of the jail cell. He knew 100% that he was sending them to their deaths. He was 100% complicit in their death, and he got no charges, no conviction, no nothing. Most incidents like this never go to jail. That's true. I'm not condoning the lack of judicial system, but things were changing. They were changing, but it wasn't changed yet. You almost applied for an archiving job with the federal government that would have archived and investigated civil rights cold cases like this one. You just couldn't because I couldn't move half the content in less than 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks is like no time. No time. White and primarily male. Yeah, so I think it was 9 men and 3 women, Maddie. DC Banks is super mad and still in charge. That's a good thing to add, Brittany. Still in charge. Read up on the Fry case. One of the first forensically based criminal cases had a lot of racism in it. Yep. You always thought that this was a great illustration. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that is actually a really good one. Yeah. Let me see if I can... let me get this in the video. That's actually good. Ooh, crap, no. Go back this way. Well, I think we're getting it, right? So over here, can I... Aha! Yes, the power of zoom out. There we go. Let me do it one more time. Alright, so 1619, this is indicative of when the first ship of slaves showed up from Africa. I would argue, and let me be real careful here when I say this. The period of slavery in the Americas extended prior to 1619, and 1619 is a significant date because this is the beginning of African chattel slavery. However, it is important for us as students of history to understand that prior to 1619, there were slaves in the Americas already. They were overwhelmingly Native American and, to a certain extent, debtors from Europe. 1619 marks the beginning of American people buying chattel slavery from Africa. So yeah, so here's slavery, here's segregation. So 1954 here is they're saying that 1954 is the year that Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case passed. Brown versus Board of Education struck down the separate but equal clause in school systems and theoretically struck it down across the board, but it left a lot of holes. The voter registration stuff especially was not thoroughly covered in Brown versus Board of Education decision, even though a lot of people think that it was. Anyway, but yeah, we're living in this little part right here. Right? That's a great image, Viper. I really appreciate you sending me that. I need to keep that for my classes. It being racially motivated killing is a significant increase in punishment also. Sure, like today it would be absolutely hydrocannabinoid. At the time, the racial element actually made it less likely to be more punished. Like today we have hate crime laws. Back then they did not. Absolutely not. Did not. I saw a meme earlier that said, if you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, would it be Nigel Farage dead? Well, I don't know if I wish anybody dead, but if he died, I wouldn't cry. You grew up in post-World Brown. I'm terrified that SCOTUS will bring it back. Yeah, Maddie's saying what I say. They're also Native American slaves prior to that, and Native American... Yeah, exactly. So weird how schizo things like the FBI are like KKK as a terrorist group, and they go after him at the same time that wiretapping MLK and trying to convince him to kill himself. Yeah, Natty, it's absolutely crazy, man. The MLK thing especially was really, really weird. It's a bizarre time in the United States. I grew up in the town where Brown happened. Crazy. Funny thing, it's not all of the local grade schools were actually segregated. A number hadn't been. DCI Brinks, the decision is Brown. Brown versus... Oh, Maddie's already typed it in there. Yeah, so basically this was a lawsuit in Kansas where a school district was segregated, and there was a school for black people and a school for white people. And a student at the school for black people sued the state of Kansas Board of Education, saying that the schools that had been provided for black students were not equal to the schools that had been provided for white students. And this, again, is under this sort of umbrella term that had been set up by a previous Supreme Court decision called Plessy. Let me write this here in the chat as well. Plessy versus Ferguson, and we mentioned this earlier in the stream, that set up this idea of separate but equal. It was legal to segregate as long as the opportunities were equal. And and Brown is a pseudonym, by the way. I think, right? That's not actually her name, was it? Now I'm going to have to look that up. Oh, it actually was. Her name was Linda Brown. Okay, sorry. I don't know why I thought that was a pseudonym. Anyway, so they sued the state. The state said, no, it's fine. And this got appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court made the decision that there could be no legal segregation of schools. And that the theory of separate but equal was actually one that was based in racism and had been cast by the wayside. And it commanded that schools be desegregated. So schools were supposed to start admitting students of whatever race at any point that they at any position that they wanted to. But I'll tell you this: that happened in 1954. So schools were supposed to begin to desegregate in 1954. Let me show you. Let me see if I can find the famous picture. All right, so let me show you this. This guy is James Meredith. All right, so again, schools were supposed to desegregate in 1954. James Meredith was an Air Force veteran that applied to the University of Mississippi in 1962. So this is 8 years later. The University of Mississippi had still not integrated. And it took President Kennedy activating National Guard troops to walk James Meredith into the registration office of the University of Mississippi under armed guard to get him to be able to register at the University of Mississippi. And that was 2 years before Freedom Summer, right? So we're not talking about an actual desegregated world in the South. The high school that my dad went to did not desegregate until 1970. It's 16 years. 16 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah. I'm telling you. Like, that's not that long ago. My dad went to school with an all-white class all the way up until he was a sophomore in high school. Craziness. Monroe was originally a local civic rights activist in Topeka who was a white dude and helped set up one of the first black kindergartens in the U.S. Cool. Interesting. Topeka had desegregated schools even in the 1880s. Interesting. Kansas has a really interesting history with race, going all the way back to when they were founded. Like the violence of Kansas even becoming a state is just crazy. That'd be a great stream to talk about. Bleeding Kansas and Kansas application for statehood. There's an episode of the police show called Cold Case that has case set at this time. Interesting. And people didn't like Biden, and people like Biden didn't support busing. This is true. So for those of you not familiar, busing was a practice where students that were students of color could ride buses to schools that were previously segregated white schools to integrate the schools. But a lot of people didn't like that idea because they said that this would be too big of a burden on the taxpayers to pay for all of these buses. Anyway, it's all racist. Anyway, so getting back to Freedom Summer. 3 men passed away, murdered, very few people held accountable. What else was going on during the Freedom Summer? I guess I should actually get back on it, right? Freedom schools. These were the schools that were set up to push for learning civics, right? So we want to teach people how to vote. They made about 40 different schools across the state of Mississippi, and a lot of these were in churches, like fellowship halls or congregation halls of churches. A lot of these were held in black businesses, Some of these were held in black schools. And across the state, these Freedom Summer volunteers that were coming down from the north would set these schools up. They would work with people on the ground, your Bob Moseses and your Fannie Lou Hamers and your Amzie Moores, sorry. And you teach people, right? You teach them civics, you teach them how to vote, you teach them what to expect, da 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 da. And it's worth pointing out here that a lot of the locations of these freedom schools, especially black churches or black-owned businesses, were targets of violence. And more than 30 of the locations where they had these ended up getting some version of violence, including being burned completely down to the ground. Lots of them had rocks thrown through the windows. Some of them had attempted arson that made part of the building catch on fire. Some of them were completely destroyed. And of course, this is by racist people that don't want black people learning about civics or learning how to register to vote or become politically active. Voter registration. This was the... but I should point out, though, that more than 3,500 people attended a freedom school during the Freedom Summer. And again, this was just learning basic stuff about how the government functions, what you should do, how to participate, etc. Voter registration. So this one is kind of a hard thing to talk about. There were 17,000 attempted voter registrations, which is a lot. Of the 17,000 people that signed up to vote, only 1,200 of them were successful in actually registering to vote. So less than 10% success rate on voting registration attempts. And some of these were done in coordination, where people would pick a day and a couple dozen people would show up at 5 or 6 different sites to all try to register to vote so that they could dilute the KKK pressure on any one given site, right? If everybody shows up in 5 different counties, you're not getting people coming in from another county to try to stop people from being able to vote. But even with all of that coordination and all of that attempt, 1,200 people were all that they got to be able to successfully register to vote. But I'm going to put a bookmark on that and we'll come back to it in just a second. There were also things called freedom libraries that got set up. And these are really interesting because the concept here is we want to promote literacy. So books were pretty expensive at that time period, and a lot of schools, especially black schools that were, technically post-segregation but still very obviously segregated, didn't have a lot of funding, especially from the state. So having a library was a tough thing to do. So there was a lot of money and a lot of books donated to set up freedom libraries. And these had books for a lot of different people because the goal wasn't necessarily just, get you to learn about your rights or your freedom or your liberty or stuff like that. It was just, let's teach you how to read. And that's going to help you in all of these other things too. So what were some of the other outcomes? More than 1,000 people that participated in the Freedom Summer were arrested. More than 1,000 people. There were hundreds of people that were violently attacked. There are potentially as many as 5 additional murders that can potentially be connected with the Freedom Summer, including people that tried to go register to vote and then were killed. We don't know if that was necessarily... It's hard to track all of this stuff that was going on because unfortunately a lot of the records just weren't made in the first place. It's a lot easier to hide racial-based violence when you just don't report it. And they kind of failed in 2 of their main goals. They didn't really get a lot of people registered. Now, let's be very clear. 1,200, we should celebrate that 1,200. right? But out of 17,000 attempts, that's tough. But I told you I was going to bookmark that. One of the things that came out of that was these statistics, these dramatic statistics where they have on record 17,000 people applying to vote. And it's important that they had these on record, that they had witnesses for these, that they would go in groups where they could give multiple testimonies. Because one of the things that happened when a lot of the federal government stuff would go down to places like Mississippi to try to see what was going on is they would say, okay, who was there with you when you tried to register to vote? And of course, it was a whole bunch of white people versus maybe one black person's voice. And none of the white people are going to turn on the other white people. But if you've got 10 people that are all going together, you've got a whole bunch of witnesses that say, oh no, we tried to get registered to vote, and here's exactly what happened. The people that are involved in the SCLC and the people that are involved in SNCC and people in Mississippi are going to send this information up the chain. And they're going to show very clear, very unimpeachable, very no-nonsense information to people in power. And what comes out of this is what we see happening right here. This is President Johnson, and on the table in front of him is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Standing right behind him, here's Dr. King. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 very clearly bans any sort of voter discrimination based on especially things like race. And this is a really big turning point in the civil rights movement, and it is still a very important part of the law today. It's not all done yet, though. We shouldn't think that it's all done yet. Unfortunately, the failure of the Freedom Summer turned into a piece of evidence that showed how jacked up the system really was, and this made changing the system easier. But the system's still kind of jacked up, right? There are still obvious inequalities in the American system. And this is why we still have to vote. And I said this at the top of the stream. I know that a lot of people are super discouraged. I know a lot of people are really disheartened about the state of American politics right now. But let's not forget how far we have come. Do you think that those people in the Freedom Summer would look at us today and go, oh, I understand that you're not getting exactly what you want. You should just sit this one out? No. People died for this stuff. The process only works when you involve yourself in the process. If you take yourself out of the process, it turns into the crap that we have right now, right? Where people are completely disassociated from their politicians that represent them from a local to the federal level. And the correct answer isn't further pulling out and sitting on our hands and pouting. The correct answer is rolling up your sleeves and going to work. Just like these people did. And that's what we really should be learning from this. And today, we're not facing nearly as dangerous of a situation as they are, right? We might be facing just as big of an enemy as they are in the form of super corrupt people with giant stacks of money. But to be fair, they were facing the same level of corruption, and those people with super big stacks of money that were in power could kill them with impunity, right? So maybe we should put this into perspective a little bit. And instead of just complaining, do something about it, right? Let's see. Supreme Court rolled back a lot of that. So the Supreme Court stuff that happened, was based on interpretation of provisions of some of the stuff that happened under the Voting Rights Act and subsequent acts that had been passed specifically for southern states. The specific thing that I believe that my wife was referring to is the decision that effectively said, okay, we're past the point now where southern states have to be watched for being racist. And this was done back under, when was that? Like 2015, 2016? I can't remember, somewhere in there. Basically, a lot of the provisions of legal structure that said that the federal government could oversee voting registration and voting activity in the South had been put in place because that's where the most voter oppression had been happening. And the South succeeded in pressuring the Supreme Court to overturn that stuff so that the federal government doesn't have as much oversight in the South because ostensibly there's not as much racism anymore. And of course, as soon as they did that, now there are rules in places like Georgia where you cannot give a bottle of water to someone standing in line to vote. Yep. Can't do it. Because of racism. Who would want everybody to vote? And of course, SCOTUS has been undoing Voting Rights Act since then. In many parts, yes. I may have missed this, but did the Freedom Summer focus only on Mississippi? It was only in Mississippi. It was only in Mississippi. It targeted specifically just Mississippi. And that was the link between Bob Moses and Amzie Moore talking with Ella Baker at SNCC. Because of the dramatic need in Mississippi. At that time period in the nation, Mississippi had the worst percentage of, it had the lowest percentage of black registration for voting in the nation. So if you're going to try to tackle the monster, you may as well tackle it at the top, right? Oligarchy seems like a version of aristocracy. It is. So oligarchy technically is a government that is run by a small group that is rich, and an aristocracy is just a government that is run by the rich. The difference here being the size of the group. So we don't have a ruling class as much as we have. Well, I don't know. It depends on how you want to look at it. The difference here would be like, are we ruled by the upper class or are we ruled by the 9 people that run Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Amazon, and Google? Because that would be an oligarchy, whereas if we're being run just purely by the upper class, that would be an aristocracy. Why are there even lines to vote? Oh, double, triple. Because one of the ways that you dissuade black people from voting in the South now is you close all of their polling stations, and you say that it's because there are cutbacks to funding, and you make 5,000 people go to one location to vote, and try to get them all to vote in one day, and you don't give them any money to run it, right? So it all has to be run by volunteers. Look at the number. And you can find this. I don't have all of it in front of me, but I know it's dramatic. Look at the number of polling locations that have been closed in Georgia in the last 6 years. And then look where they're located and take that map and overlay it with a map of black voters. And it's the same map. You can still be killed with impunity, though just in different ways. Natty, I would say that if we're trying to compare any situation today in the United States to the situation that faced black people in Mississippi in 1964, we're never going to find a comparison. And I think it's a bit of a disservice to say that anything today is that bad. If you look at the number of lynchings in Mississippi in the 1900s, where people were literally just extrajudicially killed and got completely scot-free away with it, there's nothing in You can still be. Yeah, I didn't say that you couldn't be killed for being black. Now you're trying to like straw man me. It's not what I said. The number is way less, and there is way more scrutiny on it. And yes, there are people that still kill black people and get away with it. I'm not trying to say that we are in any way a situation where the disparity isn't evident, but it is not nearly as bad as it used to be. It used to be that noble equaled rich. If noble family lost their money, they might still have a title, but probably lose a lot of their power. So it's all still the same, really. In a lot of ways, Cave, it is. In the past, aristocracy were the nobles. Very true. Might I add that one day would be in the middle of the workday? Yes, Snorlock. That's actually another good point. We in America do not have voting holidays. A lot of other countries have national vote days, and the government has declared a holiday where people have the day off of work. In the United States, we do not have a voting holiday. So all days that we go to vote are still right in the middle, where people have to try to go to vote at a polling place that has an enormously long line, and they might have to work a 12-hour shift. So then you have to try to do stuff like vote early through absentee ballot. But that's another thing that has been targeted by people trying to keep people from voting. You can maybe try to do early voting, where you go in and vote prior to the day at a polling place. That has been limited. Most places now are only going to let you do that a maximum of maybe 2 weeks out, and it has to be done at a particular location that changes all the time. It's just a mess. It would be a nice start, but most Americans would just use that day to go to the beach or grill. Cave, I think we would actually... Okay, so let me pause here. If we did it the right way, I think it would be vitally important. I just don't think that we would do it the right way. The reason the camera is shaking is because the dog is now lying against the table and scratching her face. No holiday... Really? Interesting. But you can let someone else vote for you here. Interesting. See, we would never allow that here in the United States. It's the biggest middle finger to the working class. It really is. It really is. Voting holiday would be epic. I would say so too. I'm a big fan of voting holiday. And honestly, you could take whatever other holiday that we had and use that day. Like if you wanted to take President's Day, go for it. If you wanted to take Arbor Day, or if you wanted to take, 4th of July, right? Take 4th of July and just use that as voting day, right? Kelly wants to see the puppy. There she is. There's the puppy. Hey, Kelly. And there's a puppy. It's a puppy. This is the Kaylee Poo. She is still a harlot. Still does not have her collar on. But it's so sweet. It's thundering outside. She's probably freaking out. Oh, you want to scratch the tummy? Oh, yes. Little hot tummy action. You are a big baby. Do you know that? Oh, yes. Scratch my ears. Oh, my goodness. That's what she wants. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. So much puppy love. Oh, thank you. Oh, my goodness gracious. All right. Puppy does not disappoint. All right. Call it Pro America Super Awesome Freedom and Voting Patriot Day. Dude, if we did that, more people would go vote. Guarantee you. Guarantee you. All right. So Cave has summoned the future hat. Now you have to tell me what I'm supposed to be predicting. I remember going with my sister to try to go vote, and she had to call in sick to work to do so. See, Snowlock, that's jacked up, man. Like we really shouldn't have to take a personal day off of work to go vote. I'm lucky enough that I have a polling station that's like 5 minutes away from my house, and I never have to wait in line. So I'm very lucky where I live. Yeah, this is the future hat. Kelly, do you get where it comes from? It comes from the future. It's an appropriate hat, right? Cave, what am I predicting? I'm doing that thing where I'm talking, and for whatever reason, I'm talking and my nose itches. By the way, I have completed what I would normally have talked about in the stream. But if anybody has any additional questions about stuff like Freedom Summer, racism issues in the South, etc., I'd be happy to. It's a depressing question to think about, perhaps, but considering the general rise of the right across the world, and in the U.S. specifically, if, hypothetically, Biden did win the upcoming election, what happens in 4 or 8 more years? Are we just postponing the bad and making it even worse? Okay. This is a little bit more of an opinion hat question. Because this is like an alternate future. Because Biden's not going to win. Trump is going to be our next president. So, Biden wins. Biden does not have control of the House or the Senate because the Republicans are going to win the House and the Senate. And for 4 years, we are gridlocked because the first 2 years, nothing happens in Congress at all. At all. At all. Except for a whole bunch of garbage, right? Like the House opens 17,000 investigations against every person with the last name Biden. They reopen investigations into Hillary Clinton. They try to impeach every single cabinet minister or cabinet member. They do a lot of garbage junk like that, but no actual governing happens at all. So the first 2 years you get nothing. Maybe at midterm elections under Biden's second term, they take the House back. Maybe. I don't think they would, though, because Trump would have been so mad the whole time that nobody was going to be able to sleep at night for Republican fundraising efforts, right? So Trump is effectively at that point running some sort of shadow government that he says is the legitimate government. Congress is doing nothing. Biden is basically doing what he's doing right now, which is saying whatever his handlers tell him to say, and not properly reading off of a teleprompter and confusing foreign leaders. Biden has done a few things that I've been very far behind, but it's very, very clear that he is allowing a lot of other people to make a lot of the calls. And to a certain extent, that is a mark of a good leader, that you are willing to, delegate work and listen to advisors. Both of these things are things that Trump refused to do, right? Much to the chagrin of pretty much everybody in the foreign departments, State Department, military, right? Because he wouldn't take military briefings and wouldn't take government security briefings and tried to play everything from the seat of his pants, which was absolutely horrible and potentially irrevocably harmed our international partnerships. Definitely led Iran closer to making a nuclear weapon, for sure. Probably tangentially allowed Putin to gain strength to invade Ukraine. Anyway, I don't know if Biden makes it all the way through his second term. I really don't. Just to be completely honest, I think that by year 3 or 4, he might get 25th Amendment, which is an amendment that sets up a contingency plan to allow for cabinet members to basically remove the president from power because he's not capable of exercising his office. I think that maybe throws the government into a constitutional crisis, and because of poor leadership from a very aging Biden, we elect Trump the next time when he would be 70, 82, when he's 82, which is older than Biden would be if he won again. And then we absolutely run ourselves off the end of the cliff. It would be bad. We don't want that for that. We don't want for that to happen. We do not want for that to happen. It would be better for Trump to have his second term and screw stuff up now when we are in a better, more organized position, and let all of the crazy people see exactly what they wanted, and let all of the lazy people that are going to sit on their ass and not do anything and let Trump get elected in the first place understand that they have to participate in the system for good things to happen, to get involved in the system again. And so that when we elect another president in, what would that be, 2028, we elect somebody that's legitimate and decent and knows how to run the country. We do not want to put off the poison pill of Trump for another 4 years. It would be way worse than it would be right now. And it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. On voting days, I stand outside the polling station and hand people flyers. There you go. Did the flyer say stuff like, here, you throw this away? Future hat. Will Biden even be the nominee? Wow. That's a great prediction. I think he will be. I think he will be. The mechanisms that the Democratic Party have set up to allow the Democratic leadership to run the nation is very deep. I don't know how much you all know about how delegate and delegation politics work in the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party has these things called superdelegates, which is something that they created after they got crushed in a national election and didn't win any states. It's basically the elected Democratic elite and super big donors. And they have almost as much sway over who gets to be president as the individual state primaries do, to the point that if they all decided that Biden was going to be the candidate, and even a quarter of the states, or maybe a third of the states, voted with them, Biden would end up the candidate. And I think that as much as there has been rumbling about donors not liking Biden, it's not the donors that are going to matter, right? A lot of the people that are rumbling right now are virtue signaling, and they're not actually giving a crap about politics. They're just trying to show that they're young and edgy and not part of the establishment. That's because the establishment is shutting up and biting their tongue and taking Biden. I still think he's going to be the nominee. This is a tough one, though. I can see a few different scenarios where he doesn't end up the nominee, but I will say this as a potential writer. If he's not the nominee, it's not going to be because he's forced out. It's going to be because he bows out. And I don't think Biden's going to quit. I just don't think that he's going to bow out. Even if they mount opposition against him, I don't think that he's going to quit. I think if he did quit, it would be purely because he wanted to, not because they could make him go. There's still a lot of support for Biden inside of the established Democratic convention. So there are double future hats. Double future hats. Dun, 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 dun. You got to use your connections to call up Biden and tell him, Jack, you got to drop out. I don't know if that would work. I don't know. What if our October surprise is a new candidate? At that point, that would be horrible, and they would do worse. You don't want Biden to die in October. The amount of sympathy for Kamala Harris would not overturn the amount of votes that Trump was going to get. And they would be forced to go with Harris at that point. You do, if you're in October and there's a vote in November, you do not bring in somebody that's not already on the ticket. You run Kamala Harris as president, and then you go find somebody else as VP. And I don't think the sympathy bump would be significant enough to overcome the low polling numbers that Kamala Harris has. And a lot of people are saying like she's doing better against Trump right now, but those are people that are looking at Kamala Harris in a vacuum. Those are not people that are looking at Kamala Harris as an actual one-on-one. So I just don't think that anybody's going to beat Trump at this point. I still remember the day that I noticed the lyrics of Strange Fruit. It was part of a jazz blues compilation that I'd listened to many times before, but for whatever reason, the day that your brain turned into it, and goosebumps. There we go. This is kind of co-opting the future hat, but do you think that the relative two-term presidential lock is over? Oh, do you mean like presidents always get 2 terms? In history, that hasn't been the case a lot more than it has been the case. It's been that way in a lot of our lifespan, and we get this like false feeling, right? Where, you know, like I think Tad, if we look at when you were born, we have Clinton for 2 years or for 2 terms, and you have Obama for 2 terms. But before that, we had Bush for 1 term, right? And yeah, we had Nixon for 2. But before that, we had Ford for 1 term. Not Nixon, Reagan for 2. But before that, we had Ford. I'm sorry, not Ford, Carter. Carter for 1 term. We had Ford for 1 term. Of course, that was part of Nixon's that he quit. Nixon shouldn't have won the second one. Kennedy was 1, but of course he got killed. I don't know. It's harder in today's world to hold on to something for 8 years because of the amount of communication that we have. I count Trump as a traitor. Also, he is treasonous. Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that stuff. I don't like the guy. I am not looking forward to him being president again. He'll probably die before the 25th Amendment happens. See, I don't know, man. Presidents have the best healthcare in the world, so I don't know. Him going into the residency and the president being operated, or the seat of the presidency being operated by memo has happened before, especially under Reagan's second term. You know, Calvin Coolidge maybe wasn't even coherent for the whole time of his term. We've seen people be alive with a pulse and not running the presidency before, right? And we'll just kind of leave it at that. I think the revolution will come before 2028. I do too, to a certain extent. So here's what, and I've said this before, Trump's going to get reelected. He's going to have the House and the Senate for the first 2 years. People are going to get really pissed off. The Democrats are going to get back the House. And then it's going to get worse because Trump isn't going to have Congress to stand behind him. So he's going to have to do crazy garbage junk to try to get anything done, like abusive executive position, which is really going to be annoying because of the Supreme Court decision that says that presidents acting as official opportunities have immunity, or at least the presumption of immunity. And it's going to be so bad. He's going to get impeached another couple of times. And he'll try to convince people to change the Constitution to let him run again. But then he'll have to pick a successor, and that person is just going to get obliterated. I think 2028 is going to be the beginning of the revolution where people, well, I hope that it is. I predict that it is, when people actually start voting the way that they should. But it's going to have to take really, really horrible stuff to smush in their face and get them so pissed off that they go vote for them to see stuff happen. Ironically, the Flyers say vote green, knowing they're going to throw it away. Not if Kamala Harris keeps sneaking up behind him and saying boo. Maybe so. Maybe so. If any revolution comes for the United States, it's a Nazi government. I don't know, man. I think that the left is not small and demolished. I think that the left is complacent and lazy. Natty, I think that the left is so interested in giving itself purity tests that it has lost sight of the fact that they're supposed to be the opposition to the evil people. And I think that seeing what Trump is going to do in his next presidency is hopefully going to like make them wake up and actually realize that they can't just change their profile picture on social media and then complain for an hour and then go on about their business, that they actually have to do something. And I think that there are more people than you think that are out there. I think that they're just, well, I mean, they might be demoralized, but they're demoralized and whiny instead of demoralized and motivated. My Belgian friend says Belgium has five governments and a king and nothing gets done. It's hard to explain to him how much someone can mess things up in 4-year terms. Yeah, pretty much. Right. Also, many people will blame others instead of blaming Biden. 100%. 100%. Yeah, President Putin. We saw that junk. Also, what are the winning Powerball terms? I wish. If I could use the future hat for that, I would get it. Actually, yeah, actually, read my lips. No new taxes. What up, Theo? Good to see you. Let's revive FDR somehow. It's something. So FDR is an interesting case. FDR is like, so first off, FDR was a despot. Let's be very clear. The number of things that got overturned by the Supreme Court that he did was surprisingly high. But to be fair, the Supreme Court was an opposition party to him, and they had something out to get him. But he did a lot of stuff that was really, really willy-nilly. Ostensibly, he was doing it to save our country and the economy from the Great Depression. I don't know if that's really as much as was going on. I think he maybe had... I don't know. I have such mixed feelings about FDR. Like, I think that as a person, he was probably actually trying to do things, but as an individual, he also lacked a lot of the conviction needed to make sure that they were done the right way, right? Like, we need to get more people into houses. This is going to help save the economy and create generational wealth. Yes, that's a great idea. So, okay, Congress, go make me this bill. And Congress makes redlining, and he's like, looks good enough to me, signed. You know, like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's weird. I have such weird feelings about FDR. Not like weird sexual. I mean, he was a handsome guy, but I don't think he was my type. That's what I mean. The people around him won't enact the 25th. He would die before that happens. Oh, no. I think if it got close enough that he was actually going to, they'd get him out. When Trump ran for election the first time, I said, I hope the U.S. elects him and they learn their lessons. They did not learn lessons. No, we didn't, Diviner. No, we didn't. One good thing about Biden losing is the Democratic Party maybe dies out or changes. Yeah, so that's one of the big issues, Natty, is that the current Democratic Party has gate-kept the next generation. And there aren't people between the generations of, like, Bernie Sanders and Biden and Nancy Pelosi. There's nobody next. The next people are like your Rashida Tlaibs and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There aren't a lot of people in the like Gen X zone because the Bidens and the Nancy Pelosi's have basically smothered them out of existence. They've killed them in the crib because they thought that they were threats. When Trump ran, got that one. What up, Silver? How's it going? It's a good point, but also a lot of those purity people are not leftists, they're liberals. That's an interesting distinction, Natty. That's a really interesting distinction, and I appreciate that. I would say, though, that they don't appreciate the difference between that, and they're going to overwhelmingly vote left. I get where you're coming from, and I acknowledge that you've made a valid point, and it is a good one. But I would go one step further and say they don't know that, and because they don't know that, they don't. They're typically going to vote for left candidates. The problem with the left in America is that they're concentrated in super blue states. See, I'll argue with that too. I think that you could turn any state in America Democrat if you just got the Democratic Party organized. I am convinced, like, to the point that I would ask for this to happen. I'm convinced that I could elect a Democratic senator from the state of Mississippi if I got to run the Mississippi Democratic Party. The biggest issue is still racism. The white Democrats in Mississippi that are in charge of the money are still old racist people, and they won't admit that they're racist. And this means that they won't give money to black candidates. And because of the racist direction towards black people, black voters tend to be very suspicious of white Democratic candidates and don't turn up to vote. But if you look at voters in Mississippi, if we took national tendencies and we applied national tendencies to Mississippi demographics, Mississippi should be a Democratic state all day, every day. But it isn't because of racism. What up, Casey? We are solving the world's problems tonight. So we talked about the Freedom Summer, which was in 1964, when a lot of people came down to Mississippi to try to get people registered to vote. And unfortunately, it didn't go very well. It made some progress, and it ended up helping get the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed. But it led to about 8 murders, about 1,000 trumped-up charge convictions of, like disturbing the peace and trespassing against people that were trying to get people voted to register to vote. 17,000 people applied for voter registration. Only 1,200 people were actually allowed to complete voter registration. So it's a very important time, and it definitely was part of the larger civil rights movement, and it's something that we should study, even if it didn't achieve all of its goals. I think ultimately it was a big part of a forward movement, even if it didn't meet the final goal. Any speed, is still moving forward. Shane 2024 with Frank, big time VP. I'd run with Frank. McKinnis Swift. No, I think if anything, she would probably be, if we're just trying to win, she would be way better off at the top of the ticket. I don't know if I would want to be president anyway. I'd be a vice president, as long as I could be an involved vice president. I don't know if I want to be at the top. Yeah, FDR had that 30. Yeah. See, that's the thing, Natty. Like, it's tough. FDR is why we got the 22nd. FDR is why we got a lot of stuff, right? Both parties have been slowly dying and needing a major overhaul for years, for sure. For sure. Also, this is the part where we can talk about ranked choice voting. Yeah, because first past the poll, it's a funnel, man. First past the poll just makes everything boil down to 2 parties, and if that's part of the issue. We don't actually have 2 political ideologies in America. We have like 5, and we need like 5 parties, but we can't have 5 parties because we are stuck in this first past the poll situation, and this narrows everything down to 2 if you want to vote for somebody and win, right? But this means like 3/5 of the population is voting for somebody that they naturally wouldn't want to vote for in the first place. This is why voter turnout is so low in a lot of cases, right? Goodness gracious. What up, Steve? Help me out. What's the difference between a leftist and a liberal? Okay, this is a deep one. Oh, let's see what Natty says. Leftist equals anti-capitalist. Liberal equals supports capitalism. Oh, I don't know if I would qualify it that way. I don't know if I would qualify it that way at all. Maybe we need to get a whole stream about what is classical liberalism and what is modern neoliberalism and what is leftism and all that stuff. Effectively, the way that I would classify it is liberalism as an ideology is focused on the promotion of lots of competition in the market, lots of if we're looking at where liberalism started, right? Liberalism started with a bunch of people that would today be probably considered Republicans. They didn't like taxes. They didn't like the government getting involved with protection of the market. They didn't like the government participating in the market at all. This is where we get the term laissez-faire, hands off, right? Leave me be. Let me do my government, or let me do my economy however I want to. They were also in favor of limiting access to the vote for people that had money. Specifically landowning people and people that had factories and produced stuff. So like their idea was that if you didn't participate in the functioning of society on a decision-making level, you shouldn't really necessarily be involved in voting. They weren't really big fans of women voting. Leftist today is typically going to be applied to people that are not necessarily as interested in economic stuff, but are more interested in social stuff. But this is where we start getting into a description of what is liberal. If we're going to say that liberal means the derivative of liberty, we have government that ensures equality of people. We have government that ensures equal access of things and people having the ability to exercise those freedoms. And this is where you get stuff where, we have people that are on the left promoting things like equality under the law, equality in front of courts, equality of pay, equality of representation, et cetera, et cetera. But that gets into like... That gets into a lot of nitty-gritty political theory stuff. I swear Twitch waits until you come out of work to get back. Okay, yeah, man, I hate the fact that it runs ads, and I've got it set to where it only runs the smallest amount possible. Left is an economic descriptor, liberal is a social descriptor. See, Viper, though, the thing is, like, people would disagree with that qualification and would flip it around in certain things. And especially if we're talking about history, or even if we're necessarily talking about Natty says not in the US. The only thing we have to fear is low bit rate. Neither party supports ranked choice voting. That's how you know it's a good idea. That's a great point, Casey. I joke that there are two things that Republicans and Democrats agree on. Number one is giving themselves a raise, and number two is that there can only be Republicans and Democrats. We can only have these two options and nothing else. Because then you win half the time, right? No need to discuss. There's a diagram for your political spectrum. Left is horizontal. Yeah. I mean, it's there's a lot that goes into that diviner, and it has a lot to do with, like, are we talking about now? Are we talking about historically? Are we talking about in the United States? Are we talking about in Europe? Are we talking about global? You're simplifying U.S. politics. Someone who calls themselves a liberal in the U.S. supports regulated capitalism. I think that's a generic assertion, and I don't think that we can make that. No one who is anti-capitalist would call themselves a liberal. I think that's also a general statement, and I don't think that we can say that. Guess it depends on if you want to talk to a real political term or messed up U.S. ones. To whom are we speaking, right? And what is the desired outcome? This all goes over your head. It's okay, Silver. This is just like... Natty's a really educated guy that knows a lot of stuff about government. And I respect the heck out of Natty's opinion. I really do. And I know that sometimes it seems like we're always arguing. But this is like I would give Natty a hug and we'd go hang out, and he might have a beer and I would have a root beer, and we'd kick it on the porch and be totally cool with each other at the end of the day, kind of disagreement stuff. Like, this isn't like mad. This is the way that like you could disagree with somebody and still be okay. Right? Like, I get where he's coming from, and he's not coming from like a position of illogical interpretation. and there are pieces of evidence that come from his position. I just disagree with the way that he's interpreting stuff, right? Kind of the same, honestly, but you're here to absorb the understanding. If anybody has any questions about this stuff, I'd be happy to. And I think I might actually need to do a stream on like what is left and what is right and what is liberal and what is conservative, because I think a lot of people have questions about that kind of stuff. And it has come up like 4 or 5 times in the last few streams. So maybe I need to do like a special stream or something. Natty would have borscht. I think you'll send this link to your channel to your brother. Okay, cool. He'd probably be really into these conversations as a history nerd. Maybe so. Maybe so. Things only go over your head up until the point that you're brushed up on the jargon, hence why you asked. I want to be able to speak intelligently about this stuff, but you're pretty far behind. No, Steve, like, wanting to know is the biggest step. I talk about this all the time. If you want to learn something, there's a bar, right? And about half of that bar... Wait, time out. Erase, back up. The distance from you knowing something and not knowing something is like a bar, right? And wanting to know is about half the distance of that bar. The other half is learning, right? Wanting to know is curiosity, and that is vital, and I wish more people had it. Wanting to know is super important, and that gets you halfway there. Because you're willing to think, you're willing to listen, you're willing to learn, you're willing to ask questions. So many people go, well, I can't know that, and I'm never going to know that. And they never will, because they're not curious. They don't want to know. And that's, a lot of times, they don't even understand that if they just change their mindset, it would be way easier to learn than they think. Right? Do I post these on YouTube and upload them? I do have VODs on Twitch, and I keep like as many of the VODs as I can. So I've got probably 200-ish VODs on my Twitch page, and I don't put them on YouTube because it's a pain in the butt to upload them to YouTube. Everybody tells me I got to put them on YouTube. I know. It's very difficult and very, very time consuming to move all of these to Twitch, and I don't get paid to do that. And I'm not going to get paid from YouTube to send them over there. So there's not really any incentive for me to do that if they're already on Twitch. If people really want to know, they'll make 2 extra clicks on Twitch to find my VODs. Because wanting to know will get you halfway there. See how I got back to that? Right? It's like I teach for a living or something. I can already see the stream title, What Is Left. Well, see, I've already used that song, Viper. When we were doing viewer request number 4 on Count Dracula, I've already used that song. And the title was Vladislav, Baby Don't Hurt Me. Natty, thanks, brother. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for being Spartacus. When we all stand together, nobody will know who we are. Just do a stream defining political terms through a historical/sociological lens. Could stream just that for a few months and you'd never run out of material. Steve, that's actually not a bad idea. Maybe we need to do Adventures in Civics. I've actually thought about doing, and I even have a title for this in my head, doing something called Civics on Saturday, where I basically teach government and civics. I've literally thought about this to the point that I came up with a name for it. Thing about history and these things is that there is a set of facts, but the interpretation of them can vary a lot. If you're acting in good faith, 100%, Natty. 100%. Absolutely. Wanting to know is a liberal conspiracy. What's up, Meg? It is. Oh, man. I said something today that was truly profound and also very, very sad. I was in mod chat talking with my 2 best friends, and one of my friends was talking about how he's getting to the point where he has enough money to begin his nefarious plans of sticking it to the man. And he talked about how I can't remember the exact statement that he was making, but my response was, in today's world, education is sticking it to the man. And that it hurts me to say that that was the truth. Like, in today's world, any education is sticking it to the man. Because the man wants you to be stupid. And if you really want to stick it to the man, you don't get out of the situation by being stupid and complacent. You've got to learn. And that takes effort. And wanting to will get you halfway there. Right? I'm going to steal that for your future educational YouTube channel, and I won't credit you. That's okay, Steve. Wanting to know requires courage, not always. Yeah, exactly, Meg, because you have to admit that you don't know. Don't VODs go away after a while? No, Casey, so here's the thing. If you highlight them, they stay forever. So I highlight my entire streams and then save them on Twitch. So I've got the highlights of every, well, not every, but just about every stream that I've ever done. Best history streamer on Twitch. I'm the only history streamer on Twitch. Most of my ignorance isn't driven by being intimidated by knowledge. Rather, it's wanting to know about something in the past, learning about it, thinking that's bloody stupid, and now you're demotivated to learn new things. I feel you. History can be demoralizing until you step back and realize that we're still getting better. And a lot of people ask me that. I've had people ask me this question a lot, like, how do you do all this stuff and not get completely and utterly demoralized? And it's because we're still getting better. We're not there yet, and sometimes we slow down in our progress, but we're still getting better. We're still getting better. There are a lot of ways that right now is better than 4 or 5 years ago. We just don't see it because we're trapped in this cycle of doom scrolling. But let's remember that 4 years ago was COVID. Aren't we better now than 4 years ago? Yeah. More shade and opinion for free. Honda Civics? Yeah, pretty much. Serious questions. Do you know any economics professors that could be convinced to stream? Yeah, that do Q&A. That's an interesting position. There's a guy named Econ Greg that is an economic streamer, and he will talk economics sometimes, but he's not for all audiences. Econ Greg is an incredibly intelligent guy. Econ Greg knows what he's talking about when he talks about it. Econ Greg also has a potty mouth and says some stuff that I don't necessarily agree with on social levels. But that's just my opinion. You might love Econ Greg. He's a super smart dude. I don't follow him. That's my whole statement. That's just a statement of fact. I used to teach economics, though. So if you have economics questions, you're welcome to ask me, and I know a lot of economics stuff. Yeah, you can highlight a whole VOD. Yep. At least until Twitch removes the ability to do that. Natty's also leaking Econ Greg. Yep, there we go. We are the stock market. We go up and down, but we generally trend upward. That's nice. Curiosity keeps you young, indeed. Yeah, so I taught economics for 3 years. I've taught a lot of stuff over the course of my teaching history. So I've taught government, economics, civics. I've taught literature, Spanish, computer. I taught religion class. What else have I taught? Obviously U.S. history, world history, specific subsections of history, sociology, marriage and family sociology, Lord of the Rings, right? Currently, hundreds of people die from COVID. Yeah, double triple. We're not gone with it. I mean, it hasn't gone away, but the death rates now are way, way, way lower than they used to be. Instead of hundreds of people a week, used to be hundreds of people a day were dying from COVID. So it's better, and I'm not trying to say that we fixed it. The point is just that we're making progression. And see, this is a problem that we have to try to get over ourselves sometimes. We know where we want things to be, right? I want a situation where there is actual equality in America across the board, period, right? And I would like to see that happen in my lifetime. Will it happen in my lifetime? I don't know. But because it doesn't happen today doesn't mean I can get pissed off and quit. If I know that it's not going to happen tomorrow, that doesn't mean I need to get pissed off and quit. Because if we're making progress, we're making progress. It might be tiny progress. It might be really, really small progress. But it's still progress. There's a certain point where a boulder is a millimeter away from falling off of the cliff. And if I push it half of a millimeter today, I didn't push it off, but I still got a lot closer, right? And if I push it a quarter of a millimeter tomorrow, I still didn't push it as much today as I did yesterday, but it's still closer, right? We can't give up because we're not getting there right now. And this is part of our society that's been just conditioned to wanting everything literally on demand. We can't get social change on demand. Social change takes time and effort. You can't just, log onto a computer and boot up social change and stream it to your house. It doesn't work that way. It takes effort and time, and you've got to go work for it. And we don't like that. We don't like that very much. What class subject you taught was my least favorite? That's a tough one. Least favorite as in I didn't like the material, or least favorite because it hurt? I don't like having to teach about the Holocaust. I will teach about the Holocaust in every single history class that I can squeeze it into. I don't like teaching it. It is emotionally wrecking every single time that I teach it. But I do it anyway because it's important for people to see that. So in that way, I don't really like teaching the Holocaust. I don't necessarily really enjoy the feelings that come with prepping stuff like we did tonight. I don't like talking about people getting murdered just because they were trying to help other people. That gets under my skin and makes me feel shitty. But I do it anyway because it's important and it needs to be taught, and people don't know about it, right? So in that way, a lot of this stuff I don't really like talking about. I will still do it with relish because it needs to. If you're talking about something that I just don't like talking about because I find it boring or that I don't like the class, I was really upset when I was teaching the religion class because I was not allowed to teach that the way that I wanted to. And I ran into all kinds of situations where I was getting harassed by parents and the administration of my school. Because I was teaching at a religious high school at that point, and they did not like the fact that I was actually teaching a logical approach to the scripture that they were reading. We'll just put it that way. And I got really, really tired of teaching that class to the point where by the end of the course, the last couple of weeks of the last year that I taught it, I was giving them literally summary assignments where they would come in. I would say, okay, today's reading is this, summarize this, turn it in, that's your assignment. Because that I could not get argued at for having them read the Bible and summarize it. That was about the only thing that I could do without getting yelled at by somebody. Good Lennon quote, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where a decade happens. That's a good quote, and it's unfortunately true, especially given the fact that Lenin was a mass murdering psychopath. Not psychopath, sociopath, sorry. The arc of moral justice is long, but it bends towards justice. There we go. The arc of moral universe. There we go. One way of differentiating between liberal and conservative is that liberals think we are moving too slow and conservatives think we are moving too fast. Triple, that's an interesting viewpoint. And it depends on what specific argument we're talking about. It depends on where the perspective of the issue. But I like that kind of in general, and there's an element of truth in that. I dig it. How many ChatGPT? Oh man, so many ChatGPT things. Yeah, Diviner, it's tough. It hurts to teach a lot of that stuff, but I'll do it anyway. I'll do it anyway. Some parents just want their kids to be propagandized too. Absolutely. And they should not have put those people in my class. People are afraid of questions, especially parents who haven't asked those questions themselves. Bingo. Now you've hit the nail on the head. Because my students were going home to their parents and asking questions that the parents couldn't answer. And that made them feel very uncomfortable. And that made them feel very insecure, especially about the faith that they proclaimed that they believed in. When their kids were learning about the scripture that they claimed to believe in a way that the parents didn't know. And yeah, that blew up their brains. It blew up their brains. We have not covered Cambodian genocide and the Khmer Rouge. Historically speaking, we're about probably 3 or 4 years from that, moving at the speed we're moving right now. Seen it with my eyes. Goodness gracious. I've now streamed for 3 hours. And while the chat is absolutely enthralling and I love you all, let me remind you that I streamed for 10 hours on Tuesday and your boy is tired of sitting in this chair. I would really like to raid and just bail out. Not that I don't love you all, just that I'm very, very tired. So to whom are we going to go raid? Let's go raid. Yeah, yeah, the marathons. Tad. Tad, that's thank you, man. I appreciate that. That was uncalled for, but appreciated. And yeah, now I'm weird and odd. See, Casey, this is what happens. This is what happens. Wait till something like that happens to you. And I've been streaming for a while now. Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it, man. Seriously, I do. Yeah, Cave is on, but Cave gets weird when I raid him. I don't know. Let's go do it, and we'll just be weird about it. How about that? Okay, he's working on a Tolkien map, so yeah, we'll just go raid Cave. Cave, he'll say a cuss word exclamation, and then like, why were you still on? I got off like an hour ago, or some junk like that. All right, everybody. Thanks to everybody. Tad, thank you so much for the donation. I really appreciate that. Natty, thanks you so much for the stream. I'm sorry, for the subscription. Thanks to everybody who has subscribed. Let me remind you that there are ways to support that do not get recognized inside of Twitch. Thanks to all my patrons on Patreon, and thanks to everybody that has donated books to my Big Stack of Books. And thanks to everybody for hanging out. I really appreciate the questions tonight. I would not have stayed on if this was not just a really great atmosphere of people that were interested and curious. Stay curious, my friends. This is the key. Stay curious. And I'll see everybody next time. Yell Adventure. Love on Cave some before you head out.
The bullet went right through. Right? That's always best. Holy shit! Shane! Hey, Casey.